Despite what you might have learned out on the playground, a lot can happen in 5 seconds. 140 million liters of water flow over Niagara Falls. 500,000 different chemical reactions occur inside your body. And hungry Americans will scarf down nearly 2,800 hot dogs. Let's hope they aren't relying on the 5-second rule, because as we're about to learn, 5 seconds is more than enough time to cause a lot of problems. No, seriously, don't eat that hot dog. Up first, we dig into what would happen if the Earth took a 5-second break from spinning, jerking to an instant stop from its rapid revolution speed of about 1,670 kilometers per hour at the equator, and then starting back up again at full speed. And of course, we'll tell you how it got to be moving so fast in the first place. Think you have the grip strength to hold on? Well, will it even matter when everything from the atmosphere to the oceans are suddenly thrown into chaos? You'll be blown away as we survey the damage to our planet and find out what caused it, and whether Earth would even be fit to call home once the big blue marble starts rolling again. Hang on, because we're about to screech to a halt. That's right, the Earth is going to stop spinning for 5 seconds. How much damage would this sudden stop cause? What would you experience in different parts of the world? And when the Earth starts spinning again, would it still be habitable? This is What If, and here's what would happen if the Earth stopped spinning for 5 seconds. The Earth makes one full rotation on its axis in one day. This gives us day and night. The Earth is spinning because of collisions that happened when the planet was forming 4.6 billion years ago. As a huge disk of gas and dust swirled around the sun, dust and rock grains clumped together, generating forces that kept the planet rotating in one direction. You could imagine it much like a figure skater spinning faster and faster. And with almost no forces in space to slow the planet down, we keep rotating, and will continue to for billions of years. But if the Earth stopped on a dime, would you fly right off the surface? If the planet came to an abrupt halt, the atmosphere would still be in motion. That means, though everything has lurched to a stop, powerful winds would continue to blow. And these wouldn't be a strong breeze. They would be many times stronger than any storm you've ever encountered. Now, the strength of these winds would differ based on where you were on the planet. At or near the equator, the Earth is rotating the fastest. Here, you'd experience wind speeds of 1,670 kilometers per hour. Those winds would knock you off your feet. But forget about you. These winds would be strong enough to tear up the Earth's crust. So it wouldn't matter if you were out in an open field or inside a steel-reinforced building. These winds would obliterate you. For context, the strongest F5 tornadoes have velocities up to 511 kilometers per hour. And these storms can move houses off their foundations, send cars flying, and even tear apart concrete structures. The winds from the Earth's emergency brake would be 3 times stronger than that. So if the crust under your feet didn't crumble, you and a lot of other stuff would likely go flying a great distance. But not off the face of the Earth. The escape velocity, or the speed you need to escape the Earth's gravitational forces and enter space, is about 40,000 kilometers per hour. In other parts of the world, like New Zealand or France, you'd experience slightly weaker winds, but at 1,180 kilometers per hour, these would still be much stronger than any storm ever. These winds would pretty much destroy everything, but they wouldn't be the only hazard you'd need to keep an eye out for in these short 5 seconds. Our planet is not a perfect sphere. It bulges near the equator due to the centrifugal forces generated by the planet's rotation. If the rotation stopped, the Earth would transform quickly into a perfect sphere. All the water gathering near the equator would flow away toward the poles, generating a massive tsunami. 5 seconds later, when the planet returned to its full-speed rotation, that water would backtrack. A wall of water would slam into everything and everyone twice. That's one heck of a storm. Maybe the only place you'd be safe in this scenario is near the North or South Poles. Here, the wind would be the mildest. Now, you must be relieved to hear that the Earth has returned to its normal rotation after all this, but like I said, there would be nothing left on it. Every building, all farmland, and all technology would be demolished beyond recognition. Billions of people, if not every single person on Earth, would die from the brute force of being slammed by the massive gusts of wind. Alright, so we've just managed to beat the odds and we survived Earth slamming on the brakes for 5 seconds. Congratulations on not getting launched into orbit. Now, if you thought that was cool, well, you're going to want to put on a sweater because our next segment is going to be ice cold. In the last video, Earth briefly stood still, but everything on the planet was still speeding. Well, now imagine everything on Earth, down to its tiniest atom, coming to a complete standstill. No, it's not the next ice age. We're talking about absolute zero. Wait until you see what happens when the entire world hits the lowest temperature possible. And maybe that sweater isn't going to cut it. Absolute zero is the lowest possible temperature in the universe. Nothing gets colder than that. So, if the entire Earth suddenly cooled down to the most frigid temperature for even 5 seconds, it would wreak a lot of havoc. Just how cold is absolute zero? What would happen to your body at this temperature? And what's the coolest thing about it? This is What If, and here's what would happen if the Earth dropped to absolute zero for 5 seconds. Temperature is how we measure kinetic energy of the particles in any object. Yeah, it tells us how fast atoms, molecules, and particles move. The hotter a gas, liquid, or solid gets, the faster the particles move, and when that movement slows down, the colder that substance becomes. At the lowest temperature possible, or absolute zero, particles stop moving altogether. This is because at 0 Kelvin, or minus 273.15 degrees Celsius, no heat energy remains. The coldest ground temperature ever on Earth, 184 Kelvin, or minus 89.2 degrees Celsius, was recorded in Antarctica in 1983, but it doesn't even come close to absolute zero. Even the coldest known place in the entire universe, the Boomerang Nebula, 5,000 light years away from Earth, is just a tad warmer at 1 Kelvin. So, are you ready for the coldest 5 seconds ever? At room temperature, you know, that comfortable range of temperatures of about 293 Kelvin, the air molecules move at an average speed of 1,800 kilometers per hour. As the temperatures on Earth suddenly plummeted, all those particles would slow down. At 0.00001 Kelvin, the atomic particles would be moving at a speed of about 0.18 kilometers per hour. That's 1,000 times slower than their speed at room temperature. Getting this close to absolute zero, all chemical reactions would be closer and closer to coming to a complete stop. And this would be very bad news for you and everything else on Earth. Chemical reactions are responsible for everything, including how your brain communicates with your body. Without the trillions of chemical reactions going on inside of you, you wouldn't be able to breathe or turn food into fuel. Temperatures near absolute zero would be devastatingly cold. Even at a comparatively toasty 77 Kelvin, you'd be in serious trouble. That's the temperature of liquid nitrogen. After just a few seconds of exposure to this temperature, you'd suffer severe burns, blistering, and frostbite. Needing a toe or 10 amputated could be a definite possibility. So, just 5 seconds of absolute zero could do incredible amounts of damage to all life forms on Earth. But I have good news. The chemical reactions wouldn't come to a total standstill. Even at the near absolute zero temperature of the Boomerang Nebula, chemical reactions do still appear to take place. This is thanks to the strange effects of quantum physics. And whenever quantum physics is involved, things get weird. With all the atoms on Earth at a near standstill, you'd find them starting to clump together. They'd be forming a state of matter known as a Bose-Einstein condensate. This would mean that every atom is in the same energy state and essentially identical to one another from a physical point of view. They'd start to behave as a single atom. And if you could become a Bose-Einstein condensate, it would be pretty cool, pardon the pun. For those brief 5 seconds, you'd have some unique physical properties, like superfluidity. Yeah, you'd be able to flow through tiny cracks without any friction. Only there wouldn't be any cracks because you wouldn't be the only superfluid thing on the planet. But there is a catch. Bose-Einstein condensates can only be formed when bosons are cooled to near absolute zero. Bosons are all atoms with an even number of electrons. That means only some of the atoms in your body and the environment around you could become a Bose-Einstein condensate. And lucky for you, reaching a temperature of absolute zero wouldn't be possible. If Earth and everything on it plummeted to absolute zero, it would instantly pull the heat from the space around it. To keep you and the planet at 0 degrees Kelvin, even for 5 seconds, you'd need an infinite amount of resources. This makes it mathematically impossible. But that wouldn't mean that 5 seconds of near absolute zero temperatures wouldn't destroy just about everything. And nothing would ever come back together from this soup of atoms that you and the entire planet would turn into. I hope you managed to thaw out, but try not to get too comfortable because this next one will have you huffing and puffing. You're about to find out what happens when the entire planet goes 5 seconds without oxygen. No big deal, you think? Just spend more time underwater, you say? Well, get ready to gasp as you find out what happens when one of our most precious resources vanishes for just a moment. Will it be another catastrophe or a breath of fresh air? Imagine if all the Earth's oxygen disappeared. Not forever, just for, say, 5 seconds. Would we just hold our breath? What would happen to the atmosphere? What would happen to the environment? This is What If, and here's what would happen if the world lost oxygen for just 5 seconds. Take a nice deep breath. Feel how satisfying that is? What you're breathing in is oxygen, and it takes up roughly 21% of our atmosphere, with 78% being nitrogen. Although it's not the most abundant gas in our atmosphere, it is the most important. Without oxygen, plants, animals, water, and us humans wouldn't be where we are today. 5 seconds may not sound like a whole lot of time to be without oxygen. Most of us can go at least 30 seconds without taking a breath, so it would happen too fast for your body to even notice. Your breathing would actually remain normal, but as for everything else, not so much. In just 5 seconds, the Earth would look completely different. Without oxygen, you can say goodbye to the Hoover Dam, the Pantheon Dome, and anything else made of concrete. These structures would instantly collapse. Oxygen acts as a special binding agent to concrete. Without it, concrete is just dust. Speaking of buildings, any untreated metal would instantly be fused together. This is because there's a layer of oxidation on metals that prevents them from welding together. Without that layer, metals would instantly bind to each other. If you happen to be relaxing at the beach at the time, expect a severe sunburn. The ozone layer, our protection against the sun's UV rays, is made of oxygen. Take away the oxygen and the Earth would become extremely dangerous. There would be nothing protecting us from the sun's UV rays. In addition to a sunburn, our inner ear would explode. Losing oxygen means losing 21% of our air pressure. A change in air pressure that drastic is equivalent to being at sea level and dropping down 2,000 meters instantly. Our ears wouldn't have enough time to adapt. Having a good time yet? Well, don't expect it to last long. Without oxygen, there's no fire. The combustion process in vehicles wouldn't be able to occur. Any mode of transport that isn't electric will automatically fail. Planes will fall from the sky, and millions of cars will be stopped in their tracks. The sky would be completely dark. Before it hits the Earth, light from the sun bounces off multiple particles in the air. Without oxygen in the atmosphere, there are less things to bounce off, and the sky will appear dark. Oh yeah, and while all this is happening, the Earth's crust would completely crumble. That's because Earth's crust is made up of 45% oxygen. The crust would crumble and continue to crumble until there's nothing left, sending you and everyone on the planet into a free fall.
So maybe there's more to surviving 5 seconds without oxygen than just holding your breath. But what happens if you go 5 seconds without your brain? Not without oxygen to your brain, without your brain. Spoiler alert, it's going to be just a little more intense than forgetting where you left your keys. Sure, most of us could use a 5-second mental vacation, but those 5 seconds can pack a surprising punch. You'd be stunned by how much can go wrong when your brain hits the pause button, even for a moment. Get ready to go from holding your breath to holding on to your thoughts. The next 5 seconds are going to be a real head trip. Let's see what happens when our brain decides to take 5.
Your brain can survive for several minutes after your heart stops. But what if your brain took a time out and stopped working for 5 seconds? Would you instantly be brain dead? What would happen to your other organs? And could your normal life functions resume when your brain begins working again? This is What If, and here's what would happen if your brain stopped working for 5 seconds. In case you haven't noticed, your brain is important. It controls your thoughts and movements, as well as all the bodily functions that keep you alive. This amazing organ can survive up to 6 minutes after your heart stops, but sometimes the human brain can take a coffee break. When most of the brain activity shuts down, you could be in a coma or a vegetative state. These conditions could be temporary or permanent, but they are different from your brain stopping completely. If your brain stopped for 5 seconds, all your primary functions like pulse, breathing, and blood pressure would shut down. But what would happen if your brain started working again? Could you go back to your everyday life? Sorry to break it to you, but if your brain shut off for 5 seconds, you'd be brain dead, and brain death is irreversible. Though, at that moment, you might not look dead. You'd seem to be in a deep, deep sleep. So, before declaring you brain dead, your doctors would need to perform several tests. They'd shine a light in your eyes to confirm that your pupils are no longer reacting. They'd also check whether you have any reaction to pain or if your gag reflex still kicks in. Once it's confirmed you have no pulse and no registered brain activity, you would be clinically dead. And sadly, nothing can be done to reverse this. Your brain wouldn't be able to come back to life 5 seconds later. But what would be happening to your body? Well, without any medical intervention, brain death would lead to multiple organ failure, hypothermia, and respiratory failure. Since your lungs no longer work, your body wouldn't get any new oxygen. Your cardiac muscles would start to die. Within an hour or so, your heart would stop. But the death process wouldn't end there. About 1 week after your brain death, your kidneys would start to fail, and so would your immune functions. That's because your brain would no longer be creating the hormones needed for all the biological processes in your body. You know, if there's one bright side to all of this, it's at least you wouldn't suffer. No, you wouldn't feel anything. But that's only because you're completely dead. If you're a registered organ donor, the doctors would have methods to keep your body functioning for a long time, even after brain death. They would need to maintain a healthy environment for your organs, so they'd provide your body with necessary medications, hormones, and fluids. And they'd keep you on a ventilator. This breathing machine would inflate your lungs with air to keep your heart beating. As long as there's oxygen, your heart can keep on pumping. During this time, they'd cover your body in blankets to keep you warm. You would look like you were asleep. Once the doctors harvested all the organs they could, this treatment would cease. It would make no ethical sense to keep your body alive. But it would all be worth it because your organs would be available for patients desperately waiting for organ or tissue donations. And most organs come from brain-dead donors. But brain death doesn't happen all that often. It occurs in only 1 out of every 200 hospital deaths. So you can see why organ transplants are so hard to come by. Or I guess you could see if you weren't, brain dead.
And that's a wrap on today's mind-breaking What If, where we learn just how much life can change in 5 seconds. A powerful reminder of the delicate balance that keeps our world and our lives running smoothly. Guys, it's been a long day of what-ifing here. I hope you don't mind, but I just need to grab a couple sips of water. I'll be with you in just a few seconds. Thank you. What was that? Oh, our viewership has just dropped by 180,000? Huh? I guess a few seconds really does make a big difference. It only takes a second for the world to change. Just ask the dinosaurs. In this series of videos, we're going to explore what would happen if a basic element or a force of nature were to step outside for a quick breath of fresh air for a few seconds. Just a pop out, pop back in kind of scenario. What kind of utter chaos would be wrought on our lives, our Earth, or even our entire universe? It's okay, I'm not thirsty. I can make it. I'll just drink my saliva. I wonder how long I could last. Imagine if all the Earth's oxygen disappeared. Not forever, just for say 5 seconds.
Would we just hold our breath? What would happen to the atmosphere? What would happen to the environment? This is What If, and here's what would happen if the world lost oxygen for just 5 seconds. Take a nice deep breath. Feel how satisfying that is? What you're breathing in is oxygen, and it takes up roughly 21% of our atmosphere, with 78% being nitrogen. Although it's not the most abundant gas in our atmosphere, it is the most important. Without oxygen, plants, animals, water, and us humans wouldn't be where we are today. 5 seconds may not sound like a whole lot of time to be without oxygen. Most of us can go at least 30 seconds without taking a breath, so it would happen too fast for your body to even notice. Your breathing would actually remain normal, but as for everything else, not so much. In just 5 seconds, the Earth would look completely different. Without oxygen, you can say goodbye to the Hoover Dam, the Pantheon Dome, and anything else made of concrete. These structures would instantly collapse. Oxygen acts as a special binding agent to concrete. Without it, concrete is just dust. Speaking of buildings, any untreated metal would instantly be fused together. This is because there's a layer of oxidation on metals that prevents them from welding together. Without that layer, metals would instantly bind to each other. If you happen to be relaxing at the beach at the time, expect a severe sunburn. The ozone layer, our protection against the sun's UV rays, is made of oxygen. Take away the oxygen and the Earth would become extremely dangerous. There would be nothing protecting us from the sun's UV rays. In addition to a sunburn, our inner ear would explode. Losing oxygen means losing 21% of our air pressure. A change in air pressure that drastic is equivalent to being at sea level and dropping down 2,000 meters instantly. Our ears wouldn't have enough time to adapt. Having a good time yet? Well, don't expect it to last long. Without oxygen, there's no fire. The combustion process in vehicles wouldn't be able to occur. Any mode of transport that isn't electric will automatically fail. Planes will fall from the sky, and millions of cars will be stopped in their tracks. The sky would be completely dark. Before it hits the Earth, light from the sun bounces off multiple particles in the air. Without oxygen in the atmosphere, there are less things to bounce off, and the sky will appear dark. Oh yeah, and while all this is happening, the Earth's crust would completely crumble. That's because Earth's crust is made up of 45% oxygen. The crust would crumble and continue to crumble until there's nothing left, sending you and everyone on the planet into a free fall.
Gravity, we're gonna need you to take no vacation breaks for the next, say, few billion years. But we have great benefits packages. It's a nice feeling to know that we're part of something larger than us. The whole world is held together by forces we can't see and can only attempt to understand or control. It's exciting to discover the massive impact these forces have on our lives and just how useless we'd be without them. But let's say an element that was actually a physical part of our bodies were to all of a sudden flash in and out of existence for a few seconds. Something that so many things depend on to hold them together, from the biggest objects in the universe to the tiniest atoms. What would it look like if the entire universe had carbon suddenly deleted from its code?
This is carbon. And of all the chemical elements in the universe, it's one of the most plentiful. So, what would happen if all of it suddenly disappeared for 5 seconds? How would this little change affect our universe? Could it reverse climate change here on Earth? And why would your body never be the same again? This is What If. And here's what would happen if carbon disappeared for 5 seconds. Carbon is the 4th most abundant element in the universe, and it's part of many things, including you. Yeah, that's right. Your body is 18% carbon. That's a pretty big chunk of you to lose, even for 5 seconds. In your body, carbon bonds with other elements to form proteins, fats, sugars, even your DNA. So, if carbon suddenly disappeared, would you disappear too? You might think that 5 seconds without carbon wouldn't be long enough to wreak havoc in our universe, but let me tell you, once all the carbon disappeared, nothing would be the same again. Let's go from big to small. First, the universe. Space dust that surrounds stars is made of elements like carbon and iron. This dust is clumped together by the strong winds coming from stars. And eventually, these clusters of dust form into planets. Many planetary systems in the universe are carbon-rich. That means they could have graphite crusts, carbon monoxide atmospheres, and even oceans of tar. Without carbon, these worlds would only be silicon and oxygen. The planets would crumble and turn back into space dust. Maybe they would reassemble back into planets again once all the carbon reappears 5 seconds later, but this would take millions, possibly billions of years. And whatever life has formed on these worlds would have to begin evolving from ground zero. Our planetary system is a little different because it is oxygen-rich. It has twice as much oxygen as carbon. That's because when our solar system was forming, all the carbon got blown into deep space. Yeah, at first, the Earth didn't have any carbon in it. The carbon that made life possible on Earth came from interstellar comets and asteroids. And if this extraterrestrial carbon were to disappear for 5 seconds, some bad things would happen. First, the carbon cycle would immediately stop. Under normal circumstances, carbon cycles through living things, water, and the atmosphere. This is happening all the time through things like photosynthesis, decomposition, and respiration. So if we stopped eating, digesting, and breathing carbon, sure, we'd be reducing our carbon emissions by a lot, but in this case, it would be too much. Without any carbon dioxide in our atmosphere, we'd lose the greenhouse effect, which keeps our planet warm and makes life possible. Our climate would radically change. The average temperatures would plummet and everything would freeze. Solids made of pure carbon like diamonds, coal, and graphite would disappear immediately since that's all they are. You'd find that washing your clothes, dishes, and body would suddenly be more challenging too. Carbon is a water-soluble additive that creates the soapy lather you love so much. Without it, most of these household products would become mostly just water. But you know what? Cleaning your body might be the least of your worries. Carbon is the second most abundant element in your body, and your primary energy source comes from breaking carbon bonds. Yeah, that means your body wouldn't be able to extract energy from compounds like glucose. For that matter, glucose wouldn't exist anymore. It would become water. And carbon is the backbone of your DNA's structure. Without it, your DNA would fall apart and wouldn't be able to tell your cells how to grow and function. Almost 2 trillion of your body's cells divide every day, which is essential to your life. Take carbon out of the mix and these cells would stop working. And this wouldn't only affect your DNA. If carbon disappeared, it would affect all the proteins, fats, and muscle tissue in your body too. Without any carbon in the universe, yeah, your body would fall apart. You'd just be a sloppy mess of water and inert compounds. Ugh, somebody bring a mop. You, the Earth, and the universe would be destroyed in those 5 short seconds.
5 seconds is all it would take to undo billions of years of work in forming the major bodies of the universe. And then it would take billions more years for things to reform. Carbon really holds it all together. Mad respect. We've determined that carbon and gravity are absolutely essential to the functioning of everything, Even just a few seconds without them would bring it all to a screeching halt. But what about the force that allows objects to screech to a halt in the first place? So, I know I said I wouldn't take any more breaks, but I'm going to take a quick walk down to the store to get a juice. Or maybe if I bike, I'll be quicker and you'd stick around. Or how about if I take a bus? That'll get me there super fast. But what if none of these things was an option because nothing could stick to the ground?
This is What If, and here's what would happen if there was no friction for 1 minute. Friction is what allows us to move and to slow down. Friction is how we pick things up and hold on to them. To be totally honest, there isn't much we could do without friction. A world without friction would be unlivable. But do you think you could function for 1 minute without it? The reason why friction is so important to our world is because it affects everything that's in motion. When any object is moving, slipping, or sliding in one direction, friction is acting in the opposite direction. So, for example, consider something as simple as walking. Your feet are pushing backward against the ground, and the ground reacts by pushing forward on your foot, allowing you to accelerate. But it's a lot easier to walk on concrete than it is to walk on ice, right? That's because ice has a much lower coefficient of friction than concrete. In other words, ice is much smoother than concrete, so it has less resistance, causing your feet to slip and slide. This same example can be applied to vehicles. In fact, car tires are designed with friction in mind to optimize your safety and to make sure that you can turn and stop without skidding. In dry conditions, having a tire that's completely smooth actually gives you better handling, since there's more surface area to generate frictional forces. But the reason why your car's tires probably have treads is to improve traction in wet conditions. When you're driving in rain or snow, even a thin layer of water between the road and your tire can cause you to lose control. That's because there's less contact between the tire and the road, so the forces of friction can't work their magic. But tires with treads have grooves that divert the excess water so the rubber can connect with the road and you can drive safely. Of course, there are plenty of other ways to test how friction works. Do some redecorating. Play a game of ice hockey or light a match. Fireworks for friction. Yeah, celebrate friction and be grateful it exists because you don't know what you've got until it's gone for 1 minute. Cut the fireworks. Matches don't work anymore and you can't use lighters. In fact, you can't pick anything up because your ability to grip and pick things up is due to friction. Anything you were holding on to, the moment friction ceased to exist, would instantly fall to the ground or fly out of your hand. If you were walking when friction disappeared, your legs would still work, but you wouldn't go anywhere. But if you were in a moving vehicle, you'd keep going and going and going and going until you crashed into something. Your brakes are friction. In fact, for that one seemingly endless minute of chaos and destruction, terminal velocity would cease to exist, meaning that anything in motion would be a deadly projectile. At least you wouldn't get rope burn. But that tree, that penny, that runaway train is actually the least of your worries because within just 1 minute of losing friction, actually within an instant of losing friction, the whole world would just become one big, formless, featureless blob. Considering that everything on Earth is composed of atoms and particles, and that all atoms and particles are held together by friction, well, what do you think you get when you take away friction? Nothing. You lose everything, instantly. So, if you've ever wondered why skidding cars and baseball slides look so cool, well, just be grateful for friction. Yeah, it can make life hard sometimes, but it beats losing literally everything on this planet. So go on, try it for yourself. Take a walk and feel the friction between your feet and the ground.
I've been known to experience friction with certain people, like when someone steals my orange juice from the fridge. Kevin. The one with the extra pulp is mine, Kevin. Sometimes I wish I could live in a world where all the orange juice in the work fridge was mine, where no one else was around but me. But working here, I've learned to be careful about what I wish for. In this last scenario, we'll extend our few seconds theme to an entire 24 hours. Could we last that long without one of the most basic elements for survival? Dry land?
This man is about to dive 20 meters off the top of a cruise ship. What will happen to his body when he hits the water? Well, luckily for him and others, the impact of hitting the water wouldn't be the worst part of going overboard. The worst part would be what would come next. Being lost at sea. Even if you're wearing a life jacket, surviving all alone in a giant body of water until someone rescues you will not be easy. What would be the biggest threat to your survival? How could fish eyes save your life? And how long would you have before the water starts breaking down your skin? This is What If. And here's what would happen if you spent 24 hours lost at sea. We say 24 hours because it's a nice, familiar number. But the reality is that you'll be lucky if you even last that long. Hypothermia can set in within minutes, and dehydration and exhaustion would soon follow. One crucial thing to keep in mind is that you'd be surrounded by salt water. You can't drink it, but it could save you from drowning. It's a lot easier to drown in fresh water than it is to drown in salt water. About 90% of all drownings occur in fresh water. Not only is salt water more buoyant than fresh water, but it's also safer to inhale. If you're going to drown in salt water, it's because the water you inhaled into your lungs stopped you from getting oxygen and expelling carbon dioxide. But with fresh water, it can be a little more complicated. Fresh water can kill you even after it's been removed from your lungs. When you inhale salt water, the higher salt concentration prevents the water from crossing into your lung tissue. When you inhale fresh water, it can enter unprotected lung cells and make them swell until they burst. This can lead to such severe damage that you might not recover, even after the water is removed from your lungs. But salt water has its drawbacks too. If you only have salt water around you, dehydration can be a major threat. If the hot sun is beating down on you, dehydration can begin in about an hour. You'll be losing water from sweating, urinating, and even breathing. As dehydration sets in, you'll start to feel extremely thirsty, dizzy, confused, and fatigued. None of that will raise your chances of survival. If you're lucky, it will rain. Rainfall will provide a good source of drinkable water. Just lay on your back and open your mouth. But if you don't get any rain, you'll need to be a little more creative. Try to catch a large fish. If you're successful, then all you have to do is eat its eyes. Big fish eyes are full of watery liquid that will surely quench your thirst. Yeah, I know, it's gross, but there's no time to think about that because you still have to worry about hypothermia. Generally, you can expect to survive in 5-degree water for 10 to 20 minutes before your muscles will get weak and you lose your strength and coordination. This happens because the blood moves away from the furthest parts of your body and towards the core. The best way to prevent hypothermia is to pull your knees up to your chest and keep them there so that you can retain as much heat as possible. The less you move around is also better for conserving your energy. and not attracting predators. As you've probably gathered from the past few minutes, finding yourself in this scenario would be very bad. Your best bet at surviving in the sea is to avoid getting into this situation in the first place. If you're going out on a fishing trip or boat, remember to tell people where you're planning on going and when you're supposed to be back. Technology is making it easier to find people who get lost in water, but the more information the better when it comes to rescue missions. You'd want to be rescued from the water as soon as possible because being submerged in water for any longer than 24 hours can lead to your skin breaking down. If this happens, you'll have open sores, and you would have a greater risk of fungal and bacterial infections, even if the water is completely sterile.
Welcome to What If, the show where we explore the wild scenarios that make you ponder the fabric of existence if it was woven just a bit differently. Today, we're hitting the metaphorical pause button to examine 3 thought-provoking scenarios that will change your understanding of time, evolution, and the very planet we call home. What would happen if we hit pause on evolution and our DNA stopped evolving? Could humans remain at the top of the food chain in an ever-evolving future that leaves us behind? And what would it mean if our finger slipped off the pause button and hit stop instead? If Earth's existence was coming to an end, could we escape? And who would carry on humanity's many legacies? Then, we'll dig down for the inside scoop on Earth without its famous heavy metal core. Could a coreless planet even exist? And how bad would it be for humans? But first, let's visit a world where human DNA remains static. Now, some mutations in our DNA can lead to health issues, but are there some mutations that could keep us healthy?
Your DNA is constantly changing. And if it weren't for genetic mutations, evolution wouldn't exist. So, what would life be like if that stopped? What causes your DNA to change? How would your life immediately change without genetic mutations? And what would happen to humanity in the long run? This is What If, and here's what would happen if our DNA stopped mutating. DNA is short for deoxyribonucleic acid. And even though 99% of your DNA is the same as everybody else, it's the instruction manual for what makes you, you. DNA is what makes up your genome. Your genome contains 3 billion bases, 20,000 genes, and 23 pairs of chromosomes. Half you inherit from the sperm of your father, and the other half from the egg of your mother. DNA provides directions for your body to make different proteins you need for your health, growth, and development. So, if that genetic evolution stopped, would this lead to the eventual extinction of humankind? Did I mention your DNA is constantly mutating? Oh yeah. Well, before you get too excited, no, I don't mean any X-Men type of mutations. Your DNA mutations are changes that occur in the sequence of a gene. Some of them are good for you, some of them are bad. Most are neutral.
Okay.
Mutations are a natural part of DNA replication. Most of the time, your DNA sequences replicate without any errors, but sometimes mistakes happen. Mutations occur when nucleotides, the basic building blocks of DNA, are added, deleted, or incorrectly exchanged in a sequence. Entire segments of DNA could translocate or move from one chromosome to another. They could even be replicated in an inverted structure of the original sequence. You could inherit genetic mutations from your parents. You could acquire them from environmental agents like ultraviolet radiation and certain chemicals. Your genes can even mutate by chance. But your DNA does have methods for recognizing these imperfections. Special repair enzymes cut out the wrong pieces and replace them with the right ones. But some of these mistakes get through and become permanent. At this point, your cells would no longer recognize them as errors. Mutations in your body's cells could impact your life, development, and well-being. These random, unpredictable DNA mistakes account for nearly 2/3 of the mutations in cancers. But in order to be passed on, genetic variants would need to occur through reproduction. This is called hereditary variation, and it's what makes evolution possible. So, if mutations in your DNA stopped, you'd no longer benefit from some of the mutations that occur. If you're an athlete, you won't get the so-called sports gene. This mutation in the ACTN3 gene affects muscle fibers responsible for fast tensing or flexing. Geneticists have found that elite sprinters and power athletes are less likely to have defective copies of this gene than the general public. Another example is a mutation linked to higher levels of good cholesterol. A mutation in the gene that produces the CETP protein can cause a deficiency that could cause a lower prevalence of coronary heart disease. But with all of the positive mutations out of the picture, you'd also no longer suffer from negative mutations.
Yeah, baby.
Genetic disorders like cystic fibrosis wouldn't pass on to new generations. And if our cells didn't mutate, then cancers would also cease to exist.
You're cancer-free.
Without these conditions, the human lifespan could increase. But we'd be ushering in a new era of life without biological evolution. Natural selection only operates or doesn't operate after a mutation occurs. If that mutation is beneficial to the survival of a species, it becomes more common over time. That means we'd need to develop other forms of evolution to keep our species from dying out. Meanwhile, the other animals and plants would continue to evolve. Maybe the food you eat today would no longer be substantial for survival. Look at lactose tolerance. Most mammals lose their ability to digest lactose before adulthood. But for many humans, this ability persists. This is due to a mutation in the LCT gene. 10,000 years ago, our diets changed profoundly with the domestication of plants and animals. People who were able to better digest these new foods had a genetic advantage. If we could no longer adapt to new diets, we'd have to develop new technologies to make food that could sustain our species. Well, if we can already make lactose-free milk, maybe there's no end to the ways we can survive without genetic mutations. But good or bad, these little errors are what makes us who we are.
Clearly, if our DNA stopped evolving, humanity would face significant challenges surviving the world of the future. Now to Earth, home to 8.2 billion of the finest human beings ever created, you included. Picture its beautiful mountains, lush green forests, and life-giving blue oceans. And imagine it all on a 10-year countdown to doomsday. How would 8.2 billion people react to such a daunting deadline? Would we unite and find a way to evacuate everyone safely? And if not, how do we decide who to save? And what should they pack?
The Earth is a dying rock, and time is running out. You only have 10 years to plan your escape. How could we evacuate as many people as possible? What resources would we need to take to survive? And where would we go? This is What If, and here's what would happen if Earth had 10 years left. If we found out that Earth only had 10 years left before it was destroyed, we'd need to figure out a plan for humanity to survive. And with a global population of 7.8 billion people, our survival plan would have to be as colossal as possible. Today's space shuttle technology can only transport 5 to 7 people into space at a time. This means we would need over 1 billion shuttles to carry everyone off the planet. That's not very feasible. We'd need bigger spacecraft, and fast. To design and build the spacecraft at breakneck speed, we would all need to work together. Yeah, we'd need to set aside all our wars and conflicts to help make the plan succeed. We'd need to bring the best and brightest people to our new home, including scientists, doctors, engineers, and maintenance crews.
You're trying to do useful things?
Everyone would need to keep the ships and future settlements up and running. And there would have to be intense screenings to make sure that only healthy people relocate off Earth. A single outbreak of disease could spell the end of humanity. Now, it would be impossible to bring everyone. We'd have to leave a lot of people on the dying rock. But how many could we save? Well, by some estimates, we'd only need to save 98 people. Yeah, that would be enough for humanity to survive and maintain a healthy population. Other scientists argue we'd need at least 14,000 people. Okay, so let's round this up and say we'll aim for evacuating 15,000 people. Now, how do we choose them?
I choose you.
Well, it could come down to population sizes here on Earth. For example, India could send 2,700 people to account for their 17.7% of the global population, while the United States could send 600 to match its 4.25% of the population. Or would we choose people based solely on their skills and qualifications? This would perpetuate many of today's inequalities. Who we choose would have huge impacts on humanity's cultures and attitudes in the future. To maintain all the cultures on Earth, we would need to find ways to preserve them. Okay, now let's get to the technical side of things. To carry 15,000 people to refuge in space, we would need an enormous ship, or many smaller ones. Now, while constructing one ship might be most efficient, there would be significant risk if that ship became damaged or malfunctioned. Two of the biggest challenges would be figuring out how to build such a complex spacecraft and where.
It will not be easy for you to hear.
You know, building it in space could give us more freedom. We could optimize the ship for space conditions rather than engineering it to survive the brutal trip from Earth. And it could help if we transfer the raw materials to space before beginning construction, but that would take a while. Currently, SpaceX rockets can carry a maximum payload of 63,800 kilograms, and we'd need a lot more than that. We would need to build our space vessel to become self-sustaining. Solar power would be the primary energy source. After all, it's free and the sun will keep burning for billions of years. But everything would need to be in perfect balance to produce oxygen and water, grow food, process waste, and regulate the temperature and pressure. But first, we would need to stock the ship with enough food to keep everyone alive before we can start growing food in space. To survive the first 2 years, you alone would need up to 400 kilograms of food. And that food would have to contain all the carbs, fats, proteins, and fiber you'd need to stay healthy. You'd also need 1,726 liters of water per person. Okay, now multiply those numbers by 15,000 to supply everyone on board with enough food and water. That would be a lot of water, so our ship would use cutting-edge methods of recycling to make a renewable water system. But where would we go? Well, first, we'd establish a pit stop for deeper space exploration. Luckily, by the time the evacuation began, we'd already have one orbiting the moon, designed to resupply astronauts with food and oxygen. Then, we might head to Mars, where we could orbit it for a while. But we'd need to figure out how to get everyone down onto the red planet. Could we accomplish all that in a mere 10 years? Well, we already have the drive, technology, and financing to make civilian space travel possible in the near future. But it would take much longer than 10 years to complete such a global evacuation mission. So maybe we should start getting ready now.
From evacuation plans requiring global cooperation to the massive amount of material resources required, the situation is nearly impossible to even grasp. You think we could unite in the face of impending doom and send our best and brightest off to create a new tomorrow? Or would chaos reign? I'm betting on the latter. But for now, let's get to the center of another intriguing question. And we're gonna have to dig down deep for this one. Nearly 3,000 kilometers down beneath the crust and mantle of Earth. We're gonna be under a lot of pressure, and when we get to the core of the matter, I hope you can take the heat because it's hotter than the surface of the sun. But not for long, because we're going to imagine that the core was no more. What would happen to our planet's structure, its magnetic field, and ultimately, life as we know it, if Earth had no core?
A blazing ball of fire lies deep underground. It's Earth's core. This colossal sphere of molten iron far beneath your feet is what made your life on Earth possible. Or did it? What if Earth formed without the scorching core in its center? Is a coreless planet even possible? How different would the Earth be without its core? And if it didn't exist, would you still be alive? This is What If, and here's what would happen if the Earth had no core. Underneath 2,900 kilometers of crust and mantle lies the core of our planet. This mighty ball of molten iron has a radius of about 3,500 kilometers and temperatures of 10,000 degrees Celsius. That's even hotter than the surface of the sun. It was formed during the Iron Catastrophe, a major geological event early in the history of our planet when Earth was heated to temperatures above the melting point of iron. Droplets of heavy metals gravitated toward the center of the planet, while lighter elements rose to the surface and formed its mantle and crust. The core's scorching temperatures are the result of energy left over from the formation of Earth and nuclear energy from natural radioactive decay. And it's the motion of the molten metal of the outer core that is responsible for Earth's magnetic field. You know, the thing that protects us from harmful cosmic radiation? So, how nasty would things be if Earth formed without its core? In order to form, planets require iron, lots of it, to fall toward their center. Eventually, this iron becomes their core. Scientists think planets with no core could also exist. which happens when iron becomes oxidized and trapped in a planet's silicate mineral crystals, or mantle. In these cases, the iron doesn't form a core and the planet goes on with its day-to-day existence without a scalding hot sphere at its center. So, what would happen if our very own Earth formed like that? Well, in order to be habitable, a planet requires warmth and water. It needs to be sheltered from a young, violent star like our Sun. A magnetic field acts as a planet's shelter and is created when its core cools and solidifies, distributing the liquid iron around it and sending out electric currents as a result. So, if the Earth formed without its ball of molten iron, it wouldn't have a magnetic field. This would expose us to harmful cosmic radiation and charged particles emitted by our Sun. We'd also be blasted by ferocious solar winds. Without its magnetic field, Earth could lose its atmosphere. Just look at our nearest neighbor Mars for the repercussions of that. Long ago, Mars did have a strong magnetic field, but it wasn't meant to last. The Martian core froze around 4.2 billion years ago, and that dramatically weakened its magnetic field. So weak that it couldn't keep its atmosphere protected. Solar winds mercilessly chipped away at it, slamming into the planet at speeds reaching approximately 800 kilometers per second. So you could guess what would happen to Earth if we didn't have a strong magnetic field like we do now. Instead of being a place warm enough to store salty oceans where life could thrive, our world would end up as a cold, dry, and lifeless desert. If life on this coreless Earth emerged, it would need to adapt to some extreme changes. An intense barrage of UV rays would be a constant threat, as they could damage your DNA. Most likely, you would have to live underground where you'd be less exposed to cosmic radiation. If you stayed on the surface of a coreless Earth, you'd constantly see flashes of light, even with your eyes closed.
Keep your eyes shut!
This would be the result of cosmic rays passing through your retinas. Without the magnetic field, some animals like birds and whales wouldn't be able to navigate. All life on Earth would have to adapt to living in much harsher environments. But wait, there's more. You wouldn't have all that great technology that relies on our magnetic field. Yeah, that's right. Satellites, telecommunications, and navigation systems, none of them would exist. Well, I don't know about you, but I'd rather be born on Mars than on a planet with no core. And you should probably know that our planet's core is slowly losing heat. Eventually, our hot ball of molten iron will become solid.
Just goes to show how fragile our planet really is. Losing the magnetic field and our atmosphere would make our home look a lot more like that unlivable place next door we call Mars. Well, from freezing evolution to the ticking clock of Earth's future and the vital role of the planet's core, I hope you've been able to reflect on our place in the universe today. I hope you like our place in the universe because we're not moving anywhere anytime soon. You know how long it would take to go from one end of the universe to the other? Well, that sounds like a story for another What If. Despite what you might have learned out on the playground, a lot can happen in 5 seconds. 140 million liters of